Welcome to the first of the year's essential conversations here at WellBeings. We're sitting with our good friend here, Chione Hardy, and she's back in the hot seat. She's going to ask me some questions today, and we're going to have a lovely debate, and we're going to explore some avenues. But yeah, Chione is a self-esteem and relational coach, and she's also a content creator, and she's going to ask some challenging questions today. So get a cup of tea, get that into that comfortable chair, and let's get some real good content that impacts us deeply, and seeing if we can take it into our worlds and our lives, or at least let it shape our minds a little bit. So enjoy your tea, and I hope this is as you're going to have as much fun with this as I'm hoping it's going to be for me. So Chione, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Nigel. I'm really excited to be here. I feel like our conversation last time was very thought-provoking and interesting. And today I'm hoping that we can just have a free-flowing conversation. And I really want to learn about the male's perspective. I want to learn about your own thoughts and experiences as a man, but also some of the perspectives that are being brought forward in your men's groups, because I know that you do group therapy for men and host retreats as well. So I was wondering, what are some of the current themes, or, you know, some of the patterns and perspectives that are being shared in your groups at the moment?
You know, a lot of the things in the groups a lot of the groups are very successful men who are entrepreneurs. So they're at a stage in their life where they want to look deeply at who they are. It's not about becoming, although sometimes they feel that they need to keep changing themselves in some way. But it's really about challenging a lot of that behavior in a way. And there's nothing wrong with being successful. So one of the themes that the men are bringing in, that they're realizing that they have all these things that they always thought that was going to bring them happiness. That are not bringing them happiness. So they have these huge bank accounts and huge material wealth, stocks and shares, and they have a huge emotional deficit. So they struggle in their relationships. So relational struggles are a huge focal point. Another huge point is them looking at who they are and wanting to understand particular ways in which they foreclose intimacy in their world. So whether it's like they are, I'll use an old term that some of the viewers may not understand, and it's like a hysteric character, where fundamentally at times they put people in the audience of their life. They love the stage, they love attention, they love to bedazzle you, they love to seduce you and manipulate you, and the characters that you enjoy being around for a while, but they don't have a lot of intimacy and a lot of real deep exchanges with people. They just want people to validate them, and when people move to want something closer with them, they move away. So they're exploring and exposing this part of some of their characters where they've been chasing this sort of compensative behavior their whole life that they learned as a young boy, that was a believable falsehood, that if they have people in the audience, if everyone's validating them, that's where security comes from. But that's what the young boy and I have women's groups where this is also very a real deal. So looking at the way they relate, looking at their behaviors, looking at how they exchange with people, how they struggle with real deep exchanges. And then of course this is in the business world, and in their friendship world, and in their private romantic lives as well. So this is everywhere. we look at that construct, and then we also look at the other variations of how they compensate, how they overextend, how they one of the men's in the group said how he peacocks, you know, how he wants to be larger than, to cloak and hide his smallness. Instead of keep cloaking and sort of adding layers to be bigger, these men are wanting to grieve the pain of being small. They want to let that young struggle that is hidden in the background, it's driving their need to be more in business, more in life, but at the heart of it, they feel less than. So I suppose retrieving those lost parts, allowing them to be accompanied by others, realizing that they don't need to be larger than, that they're wonderful just as they are. That's a huge theme that runs through the work. Also, then other themes are, after a while in some of the romantic relationships, then some of our men in the group, the women or the men, depending, are starting to think about polyamory as a new aspect to bring into their relationship, in the hope that it will add a new resurgence of vitality where in its present state it was lacking. So that's brought in, which is a very vulnerable thing for them to do. So we have a long history of documenting how that goes within those relationships. And I suppose it's just everything else, you know, the men, they come in, they talk about, you know, they allow themselves to talk about the trouble. They allow themselves to be. And let me just, for the viewer, let me explain about that. It's not just talking about the trouble or the struggle. It's about speaking from the trouble or the struggle. It's allowing us to enter into that world of how it feels for them. You know, so they can bring that feeling into the space, not just the cognition. So, you know, bringing more of themselves and letting themselves be that little bit more naked. And wow, like the main thing about all this whole jazz, and we may have heard this term colloquially, or is that when you do that, you really start to challenge this part of you that needs to be more. Because a lot of the guys come into this work feeling they need to be more than to be loved. They need to be more than to be seen as lovable. And through this work, they get to, in time, realize that they are loved because who they are, not because what they do. In the groups, most people we don't share what we do. You know, it's not about, because, you know, it's not about their job title. It's not about their bank balance. It's not about how many cars they have. No, that's irrelevant, because everybody has a heart, and often the pain is hidden, and we allow it to come forward. So that helps them become more vital. That helps in a very grounded way, slowly lean towards others in meaningful ways, and start to realize that they have a sense of belonging. And then they bring this back into their lives. They bring this into their families. They bring it into their businesses. And a lot of the times it's got this wonderful domino effect where when they can meet those parts of themselves, then they can change how they think about themselves and others. And that's beautiful, you know. So that was a long answer to your question, but there's so many things. There's so many things there.
There's so many things, and there's running themes. There's a running thread between each of the different subjects that you said. So what you're describing there, it sounds almost like the men who are coming in, they're stuck in that superficial paradigm where they're not really, or they're struggling to connect with themselves and the people around them as well. So what would you say for, like, what kind of advice, or what would you say to a man who feels that sense of being disconnected, and maybe they're not quite at the place where they're ready to open up, but they're feeling that discontentment, and they know that there's something which isn't right, but they're not yet taking those steps towards actually being open and sharing how they really feel, so that feeling, that stagnation, and they understand, and maybe they can realize that all of their relationships are transactional. What would you say to a man like that?
Well, first of all, they may not even want to be more vulnerable, and they also may not realize that they're presenting all the time, performing all the time versus revealing. So they may have no awareness around that, because that's what they learned when they were young, that's how it, again, a believable falsehood that I need to be more, and if I'm more, or if I'm perfect, and then I'll be secure, then I'll be safe. So this is like, so, and even using the term superficial, I don't kind of use that term too often, because it's not as if like they have any conscious awareness a lot of the time that they're in this level of awareness. So for me, it's like, if you're looking honestly at your life and you're happy with where it is, and you're not really wanting to shift it or change it, then that's fine. But if there's something about where you're at in your life where it's just showing up again and again in your relationships, or or maybe there's a continual, another man joined the group because he was constantly getting sick, and he came and he said, I don't know why I'm in this bloody group. He's all so like, what's this vulnerability all about? And, or even like, what's the benefit? But through this process, he healed his irritable bowel, because he was able to slowly open and talk about the things that were inflaming him, that when he wasn't talking about them, it was inflaming his body. And to grieve them with us, it was beautiful. It took him about 2 years, and he started to come in and say, well, I don't have that inflammation anymore like I once used to have. So so yeah, so honestly, like, for the people who don't think that they have anything to change, then it's not for them, just to name that. But for the people who there is a voice in the background that's saying, oh, that's still there, or oh, I'm actually not that happy, or it didn't go well, or it's actually who are exhausted with performing all the time. And generally the theme with performance and sort of versus revealing is that there's also a big period where they want to isolate, because it's so exhausting to have to deal with it all the time, that there's a lot of avoidance behavior as well. So if you're noticing this, like you're always like the life and soul, or you're always the go-to guy that people go to, and if that gets exhausting after a while, then there's periods where you're isolating or in avoidance, then these sorts of experiences would be powerful for you to look at some of the unconscious drivers that are facilitating that structure. But yeah, it's really just about people. If you're not happy in some area, even small, because you won't make it a big thing, because you minimize yourself a lot. So I just want to name that as well. Men have a tendency to really minimize the things and say, oh, that's not a problem. And again, for those people, that's fine. Maybe this is not for you right now. But for those who do hear a deeper whispering that something's just there constantly, whether it's relational dynamics, bickering, fighting, inability to sleep, constant chasing a drug of some choice, whatever that might be, maybe even money, alcohol, drugs, biohacking, whatever it is, then maybe there's something closer to home that needs tended to.
The last conversation that we had on the Instagram page, there was a clip, and the title was The Unspoken Truth About Men Sacrificing Themselves. And there were 2 comments, which I have here, which I'm going to read out. And in the clip, we were talking about how, in society, we have these gender roles of men, kind of holding back their emotions so that they can strive and become more. And I thought it was interesting, these comments anyway, as a response to that whole sentiment. So I'm going to read them out here. The first one says, "We behave that way because women reward it. That is all. Everything else being said is something. There was a swear word there. It's really simple. Women act like they don't know that we're talking about, but they do. So there's that one, and then I'm going to read the second one, and then we can talk about these comments. So the second one says, women really don't respond well to weakness. Women are comfortable going against their nature, but men aren't. We're logical creatures, and we can see what's going on. Women feel that they know how it should be, but will just deny the facts as they don't want to be confined, which is okay, but it's having a massive knock-on effect throughout society. And there's some pretty big consequences of that, actually. Men raised in single mother homes are more likely to be criminals, both sexual and violent. They're actually hurting more people with the butterfly effects of it. So, of course, there's a lot going on in these comments, but I do definitely see that there's this like resistance of like men wanting to assert their masculinity, but then it seems like, maybe I'm reading this wrong and you can interpret this in a different way, but it seems like men want to be masculine and they want to fulfill that role. But then there's also a sense of resentment towards it as well.
Well, you'd have to, it's so individual. So, you know.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
It would be case by case, you know, and
yeah.
It's hard to really generalize this, but, you know, I think the majority of men were brought up in families where they never experienced a father who was vulnerable. Think of the previous generations of war from in America, the Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, in Europe, the Second World War, you know, Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, even 9/11 sort of atrocities. Often men are brought up in homes where the father is vacant, the father is emotionally not around. And with that often comes with a type of an initial sort of abandonment, psychological. We don't know him. His world is locked away. So we're not brought up that way. I wasn't brought up that way. I didn't. The first time someone hugged me, I looked to scan the area to see if anybody was watching, just in case somebody thought I was gay when I was 21. That's where I was. I was brought up in Northern Ireland where there was a war, and there was no space for vulnerability. There was a psychopathy that was hiding a scared, schizoidal, terrified men. So moving out of that reality around war, just generally speaking, men's fathers were not that vulnerable models to their children, not just their men, but also their daughters. Not just their sons, but also their daughters. So first of all, we're starting off with that. So we're going against the sort of, so through those two questions, they felt like we were going against the current as well. I felt a sort of having to go against something, and then having to feel that they, you know, that because the fact that, there's a point I want to make also, that most of the reasons why there's such high divorce rates in the US at the moment is because the women start to get very dissatisfied or very, very deeply or felt starved in the relationship because of the lack of the emotionality as well. So I just want to, like, stats are proven that that's also really true. So on one hand, most men say this earlier on, and so some of the younger guys in the groups, they would be saying that, yeah, like they have to be this masculine man who displays. And I think it's not either or here, guys. It's not about having to be this like I don't mean this in a bad way, like a male yoga teacher who's all feminine and all, which is cool, but I don't mean that. It's not about losing your balls. It's about holding on to them and being able to have an open heart as well. So how can you be a man? How can you be stay in that polarity of that masculinity and penetrate the woman with your vulnerability, as well as all other ways that you would want to penetrate a woman? So like how to bring yourself, all of yourself, not just this part. And if there's some woman rejects that emotionality part of you, and you're feeling that that's important, then maybe that's not the right match for you, because not all women want you to be this robot who's just come back from war. But there's a theme here. So we're going against the current, and we're also, which is historical. So we have to deal with that first. We have to have new mentors, new spaces where we see the benefit, because in the background there's a feeling that, is it actually going to be beneficial to be vulnerable? So you have to be in spaces and places. Group therapy is a great place to do that. Maybe you have other friends who are a little bit more softer in their ability to, soften so that they can express their feelings than you, and hanging out with them more might be another way to explore this and understand their world. But going into groups, then you can start to have a new experience of how this is working in other men's lives, and then noticing, as you hear their stories of their levels of intimacy with them, with the people they love and the world around them, is also a really good way to shape that historical perspective. Second of all, it's like, it's really about allowing yourself to move towards sitting with this, I suppose, a few questions, having a few questions, because the after effect, this effect that the women report in such high divorce rates at the moment, is that they're kind of starved of this. They're in a sort of state of emotional poverty. It's that, it's hard to know what you're missing if you never got it. So first and foremost, get into experiences to experience that. Then your ideas around that, this is what women want, and that a woman wants a man who's confident, who's independent, who's established, who's strong in some way. Yes. So challenging the idea that it's either or, which is a second component. So yes, you can be all of that, and you can have an open heart.
So for the men who are brand new to this, what does having an open heart actually mean? And how can you communicate that in your relationships, communicate that vulnerability?
Yeah, even on hindsight, thinking about that term open heart, it can feel a little bit abstract in a way. So I suppose what I could say, if I was to re-edit that, would be just like learning to be to hold less in with the people who matter, to have that one friend where you'll share more of how you're feeling, to ask well, another thing, when we're men, we realize that that you do have needs, like relational needs, where you can share how you're feeling with someone. You don't always have to be the guy who has it all together. You don't always have to be this rock in the family that's impenetrable. Like that doesn't work long term. So it's really about like starting off with sharing some feelings with the people who you care about, where you can challenge the role, where you need to be this rescuer, where you need to be this sort of centurion, where you're the person who fixes everybody but doesn't have any problems, because that's not true, because we all do. And where we can share with them, and if it's cognitively sharing it initially, that's fine, and then know that let some emotionality in with that at some stage as well. I think that those would be two really good first steps. And I suppose a third step would be to move towards, if that was starting to feel, because it might feel awkward at the beginning, it may feel a little bit clumsy, it might feel a little bit, you get a hangover of feeling a little bit of shame afterwards that you reveal too much because you've kept yourself, that's all part of this. Initially you're going to feel a vulnerability hangover whenever you start to just share for the first time. That's part of it. It doesn't mean it should stop you from feeling it. It's just that it's new. And it's okay not to be the guy all the time. It's okay to, like, for example, men often avoid the uncomfortable conversations in a relationship. They avoid the pink elephant in the room, and normally it's the woman that brings it in. So one of the most attractive things from our female groups that we run and mixed groups is women love for them to be called out. They love for it to be named the pink elephant in the room. So the man bringing forth the vulnerable sort of struggle is a very, on one hand, a masculine quality that's also bringing in a level of vulnerability and of, because this is what it's about. Like, how can I, like, that's where you encompass both. It's like you have the strength of a man, you have, and there's nothing more satisfying that I hear from the women who've experienced this in their relationships is when a man can do that. And for him to be able to do that, he would have had to be able to be with his own ordinary worst parts by being vulnerable, sharing with them, speaking to a therapist, joining a group, having this sort of emotional, I don't like to use the word emotional intelligence too much, but just this capacity to feel more and to know himself more. And if he can feel more and know himself more, then he can have a sense to the space around him more. And then he can not be afraid of bringing himself into that space and addressing the pink elephants. And that is a beautiful dynamic. People often say, well, what's a healthy relationship? I said there's no such thing. I would say the only thing we can strive for is a workable relationship. And that's what I would call a workable relationship, where both partners can bring stuff in and where a person can be comfortable for the other person calling them out. How can I said this the other day to a couple, what can you do to allow your partner to call you out more without you getting defensive? So how can we do that? And I think the man being able to bring that in is a beautiful example of how we can be manly and also at the same time have an open heart or be vulnerable, be interested in that landscape.
Yeah, no, I entirely agree with that. And as a woman, I can say as well, I would find it incredibly reassuring if I was in a relationship with a man and he was vulnerable enough to actually lead that conversation, because it's showing me that not only does he trust me, but he's actually open enough to share those innermost feelings. And that shows that he's committed with the relationship. That shows that I am his safe space. So that just adds a deeper level of intimacy to know that, the relationship is, growing and evolving and he trusts me. And just coming back to this comment as well, where someone said women don't respond well to weakness. I feel like if a woman, maybe some women do not respond well to weakness, but I think that it's all, if you're a man and you prefer a man to be like more like masculine and stronger in the relationship dynamic, then if for the majority he has that, level of stability, then just a small amount of vulnerability, or not even small, but, vulnerability isn't going to shake up the whole relationship. I can speak for myself anyway and say that I'm more like, I welcome it, because men are human beings. Right, like any woman who feels that, who doesn't like her man sharing that, vulnerability or confusion or anything like that, then I would say, like you said, Nigel, that maybe that's not the right person for you. Maybe they're not actually really that developed, or maybe they are just not that well versed in relationships, and it's something that you need to work on together. It doesn't mean you automatically have to eject yourself and not trust her.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again, I wouldn't eject right away, because there's obviously something going on there where She has seen vulnerability as a threat from her childhood, where she must have saw something that she learned to make sense of it by saying, I'm never going to be that in my life because that was too scary to witness. And then projects that onto the men. You know, I have an example of a client years ago where her belief was that men were only meant to be like big and strong so that she would be protected, you know. She was brought up in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and her family were involved in the military in one of the I'll not say which side, in one of the sides of the war. And the police would come in and check for arms in the middle of the night and just break in. And so she was terrified of lots of these incidents, traumatized from it, and also cloaked in the sort of the troubles at war passes on to children. So she always had lots of locks on her doors, and she always felt that men were only meant to be strong, only meant to be bigger than her, because their primary job was to protect her. And I forget it, she was in a group one time and she shared that, and it was like such a pivotal moment where the group responded, all the women responded and said, actually that was not their reality, that's what men were here for then, and that you know, there's so many other things that men are important to have in a relationship. And she also was struggled with vulnerability from men because it was a sign of weakness. She had said that on multiple occasions. So through that process of therapy, and it ended really well in a way, because I remember when we finished one of our final group sessions with her and she had really challenged these views, she turned around and she said, you know what? She says, and she was ready to leave the group. And I says, well, when you're getting married and you have a man who's smaller than you and he's wearing a pink shirt, I was joking, you know, and you know that you've done it, you know, you've transformed this wounding. And then about 2 years later, she sent me a photo the day before her wedding, and the man was smaller than her and he was wearing a pink shirt. But the idea of just like a more feminine, open, more vulnerable male who didn't have to be this big, towering military soldier was challenged because she allowed herself to grieve the pain of her childhood and be vulnerable herself, and realize that vulnerability was a new safe orientation, and that locking herself away and needing to be protected was a believable falsehood from her childhood. And as an adult, it actually wasn't serving her. And she moved through and moved towards life in new ways without having her doors locked, without needing a man to protect her, and welcomes vulnerability in the other because she was able to welcome it in herself. So yeah, like, it's understandable. So again, if you have a partner who struggles with you being vulnerable, then she may never want to look at that history that's causing that, and that's something to experience over time, to see if that's something that you can live with within the relationship. Is that something that you can accept, and then you get your vulnerable needs met somewhere else? Or if she's open to move into therapy, then you can explore that. Either way, we respect her orientation, you know. It's not that she has to do therapy, it's if she's feeling drawn to do it, you know. Get therapy, support, anything under that. So that's what I feel. So yeah, women, and and I said earlier around that men and women often can have parents who are very masculine. You know, the mother may not be feminine, the father may be very masculine as well, and they may be in a power dynamic. So we've reported over the last 10 years where women seem to be a little bit more masculine in their ways as well. So this is a real trend that I meet in the groups. I meet very professional women who are top CEOs and entrepreneurs, and there's very little space for vulnerability. Sometimes vulnerability is used as a a display somehow to, you know, like almost, and this is another quality of the hysteric, where we act who we think we should be to the world. So that's different. So I see this trend where, yeah, women don't find a lot of value for being feminine, and they push forward in the world, being very masculine in their way, and they get a lot of success on the business front. But then the struggles in the relationship landscape, and sometimes you can find a man who doesn't want emotionality either, and maybe there's a lovely fit there for them. There's lots of different types of relationships. Some of them are very practical, some are very intimate. So it depends what you're wanting for. We're more to the audience here. We're kind of speaking to the people who are wanting an intimate relationship. That's workable. We want to develop and blossom in the relationship. We're not talking about the relationship where like you're passing each other like boats at night, where you're, you know, with compassion, you know, like where you're in the governor of this or you're reading the newspaper all day, or where you're, you know, like you have everything, you're doing everything you can, but to be in the relationship, ahead of this, ahead of that. So we have a lot of those sorts of people who come in who have those sorts of orientations where they are members and they just are never in a relationship, and they start to realize that, yeah, they're either kind of happy with that, or then they want to then come back and deepen towards a more intimate, open, vulnerable, workable relationship.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you said there about how there really is no right or wrong. It's just people are at different places. People have different conditioning as well. And it's really just about finding someone who is your reciprocal, who you're compatible with, and, you know, maybe someone who also wants to evolve with you. That's how things can work.
Yeah, we have to, you know, for me, it's all about how can we grow regard for one another wherever we are in our life's journey. You know, like if you are going left and I'm going right, you have the right to go left and I have the right to go right. You know, like they respect the other if they see the world completely different than us. And it's not about being controlling or there's one high road and I don't want to promote grandiosity here with vulnerability at all either. It's just about, you know, listening to know if you're really filled in your relationships in your life, or you're noticing you're running telling everybody else and displaying all the time and getting exhausted, and maybe there's something here worth looking at.
So what would you say to the men and women as well, because really I'm here to learn about the man's perspective, but you know, there are a lot of men who I have seen on the internet, and maybe this is happening in your groups as well, where they talk about their relationship struggles and the dynamics where the women are in their masculine and they're having that power dynamic. What would you say they could do in order to try and, you know, settle within that relationship? Do you feel like there's any space there, or do you feel like you should just choose a different partner?
No, again, it's individual, partner by partner basis. It's too hard to say with that question to give the exact answer. But you know, if you've got a power dynamic, you know, seek, reach out for couples therapy. Is really a wonderful way to have a third witness. You know, just somebody there who can navigate and the choppy waters to see what's been reenacted in the relationship, like what's been replayed here.
And so
the power dynamic is really about fighting to for someone to be right and the other person needing to be made wrong.
And if there is no power dynamic in the sense of arguments, but really the woman might be less emotional and the man might be yearning for that emotion from her, maybe he struggles with vulnerability and actually, you know, expressing that he has needs which need to be met as well. Like, what sort of things can a man say? Like, do you have any examples of sentences that a man can use in order to actually open up in that way?
Well, first of all, you know, I think it's about well, for me, like one of my understandings of how to orientate in a relationship is, and this is based on you, first of all, getting the support to look deeply in to get to know yourself, right? First. So when you can be with your ordinary worst parts, get in touch with the trouble from the past, trouble in your relationships, allowing yourself to feel, being able to be with your ordinary worst parts, your ordinary struggles, then you're way more able to accept your partner's ordinary worst parts. I'm not saying that you accept like her cheating on you all the time and like just being like this despondent piece of rubber. No, I mean like for you to be able to, in this case, welcome the struggle she has, where she struggles with being vulnerable. And maybe you think about how you also at one stage struggled with being vulnerable. And when you start talking about that, sometimes it's great to enter into a relationship where you both don't know about how to be really vulnerable. What would it be like not to know together? It's really important to think about that. Try not to be, just because you've done some therapy or you want to be more vulnerable, that you're in a grandiose position, that you're more superior. So just trying to, again, when you can be with your own ordinary worst parts, you can notice that we're all going to have struggles in a relationship. There's all going to be something that the other person is going to be struggling with. And so for you to hold that in mind, for you to be compassionate for that part, to allow space for the other person to come in, to allow space for them to talk about why that's so important, to be so private around her inner world, and to just allow space for it, So that's one way where you can not be very pushy, but also curious with your partner, and see if she's open, or he's open to be vulnerable. We could say that for both sexes, and to just, to not have to have it now, not to have to demand it now. But there's a big part of the relationship. That's why I wanted to come in. Like, how can we, I think there's a point in every relationship where you say, well, you know what, this person's not perfect, but they matter enough to me to be able to be okay with the imperfections. And so there's a need at some stage to be able to, not need this projected perfect other that a lot of people sometimes have towards themselves. So they're going to have some warts. We can talk about how that impacts us. We can be compassionate, or at least invite that in. If you want more vulnerability from your partner, I think foundationally that's the first step, just to welcome them, to talk why it feels so important for them not to be vulnerable. Allow that dialogue to happen, to be there, welcoming her as she is or as he is, just allowing space to because sometimes it might be that you will model the vulnerability that you want the partner to be, so you may start to do that. That also really impacts the partner over time. Some of it, of course, they can not like it, but that doesn't mean that you don't do it. And others really start to enjoy it after a while, because they notice that when you're being vulnerable, the person's heart's opening. Like there's an energy exchange happening, there's a closeness that's happening, there's a togetherness that's happening. And this is felt, and then it only takes then the other then to respond to that, and then their heart's open, and there's the real exchange. And that only has to happen a few times, where each can reflect over breakfast or an evening meal and say, hey, that really went well. I really enjoyed that. That really felt like something new. And how was that for you? So it's about not pushing it, getting off your high horse, thinking just because you want to be vulnerable that they're less than because they're not. And you just meet them and you open up and to being curious and just gradually walking together. And for some reason, if you've given it ample time and you've allowed yourself to meet yourself through that process, because everybody asks, when's the time to leave if things are not going well? Well, I would say, well, meet yourself first. get the support to meet what's really going on for you, own your parts in this. Through that process, then you can decide whether to stay or to leave.
So that was very interesting, all that you said there. The most important points that I picked up were to have patience and not have black and white thinking. So when your partner can't give you what you want exactly then, you shouldn't just say, well, the relationship isn't working, or I'm going to give up, because, you know, relationships take time. So patience, leading by example, and positive reinforcement. I think that's a really big one. And I think those were some very important points.
It's just all about, you know.
And curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity is there, and it's just about, you know, wanting to let the other person feel your interest. And this is another key point of vulnerability, because often we were brought up in families where there was no real deep interest in our worlds. So sometimes whenever a partner wants to show interest in the other partner, it can feel like, can feel really, can even feel intrusive, can feel invasive, can feel suffocating. And then you just have to go slow. You know, it's like, this is really important to understand. Like, we all come from childhoods that shape us, and then we bring that into our relationships. So, patience, curiosity, compassion, getting your own work done, not needing to use that as a weapon that you're so much more advanced than your partner, and just walking and continually wanting to walk towards the other and explore the unknown of what the hell does it mean for two people to be vulnerable together.
I love that. And I think that you know, men and women, they should support each other, right? They should support each other. That's exactly why two people come together, to be that source of connection, intimacy, and inspiration as well, that safe space.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't work. You know, like, you fall out, you fight. That's part of a relationship as well. You know, it's like, it's not about being in this non-fighting relationship. It's like, fights are important. They clear things out if they're not just regurgitated similar fights over and over again. Arguing, it's part of the deal. You know, it's like, you're not supposed to be all smiley and happy all the time. Then we're dealing with something else we need to talk about in therapy. But it's like, yeah, it's okay to let the trouble into the relationship, and it's nice to have long periods of peace where we are on the same team. But also, it's not a reason to leave a relationship just because there's some turbulence either.
Wow.
I had somebody in the group recently, and she wanted to leave the relationship because she realized that they were fighting, and that she realized when she was very young that, you know, she was not going to repeat what her parents did, and that fighting was a sign that the relationship was going to end. So unless it was perfect, she was leaving. She was able to realize that was a young belief, that that fighting and arguments are often part of a healthy relationship. You know, it's part of a healthy relationship. It doesn't mean that it's the end of one.
And that's an important message to women and men. You know, it's for everyone, really. Right.
Yeah.
So there was another topic that you did bring up about opening the relationships, but I feel like perhaps we should save that for an entirely separate episode, because there's so much that we should and can go into regarding that topic. But this has been a really interesting conversation. I feel like the most important message that I learned from you was that it's okay to be vulnerable. And as a woman, you know, you should support your man, the man who you're in a relationship with. You should give him space and time for him to learn himself. And also, as a woman, lead by example and actually show him that it's okay to be who he is and to encompass all his emotions, and that he should, and that it takes time to evolve into this version of yourself where you can be so open and expressive, but that's really how we heal ourselves generationally.
Yeah, and just one of the very common trends at the moment is just women pointing fingers at men at falling short on all these different levels. And the reality is that, you know, you point the finger at somebody, you know, there's always three fingers pointed back at you. And I realized that that's a really important part to look at, to really, it's not, the relational health is not based on like scapegoating one person as the problem. I think if you're seeing that dynamic play out where the man is falling short emotionally, then I would really invite you to get support therapeutically to see, you know, if you can't see like your part in that. You know, sometimes we don't allow ourselves to make ourselves available for the other. Like there's so many parts to that. It's not just a one-way street. So if you're really, you know, wanting to look at it from a broader, take off the blinkers and to look at it, you know, invite in some therapeutic eyes and another heart to feel into the space between you and your partner. And it can be very beneficial. You know, it's, yeah, everybody struggles in their own ways. Maybe it's often easier to see somebody else's struggles than our own.
Mic drop there. Wow, that was very profound. Wow, well, thank you so much for having me, Nigel. This has been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot about how to navigate certain things today, and it's been very enriching.
Thank you, Chione. And, you know, and for the viewers out there, you know, like if you are struggling in any way in your relationships, do reach out to us. We have a team of therapists who can help you. If not, reach out to someone in your local area. You know, it's like, and if you're a man who's wanting to, you know, understand, is this thing called vulnerability got any merit? Does it actually reap any benefits in your world? Well, you could philosophize about it all day long, or you could just enter into a men's group and start to experience what that might feel like firsthand, to be in a space where you, and a woman as well, where you're in a space where you don't have to be more than, you don't have to be a caretaker, you don't have to be a rescuer to be welcomed. So yeah, anybody feeling that, and if you know someone who's struggling, please, you know, send them this podcast. And if you did get any benefit from this, hit a little like or a share, or put a little comment in, because we get a lot of benefit from the comments. This podcast is kind of coming off the back of some comments that came on a previous podcast. So thank you for your time, thank you for your hearts, and keep moving towards others and the world in real and meaningful ways. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, T. Thank you.